It's April 14, 2001. Prominent Congolese singer-songwriter and dancer Koffi Olomide asked the crowd if he can play a song by a hit group named Magic System. The song you're about to hear is revered internationally. Watch the crowd explode the moment the song begins and the group begins to sing.
Moi j'aimerais qu'on refasse Premier Gaou. Vous êtes d'accord avec moi? On peut refaire Premier Gaou? Ok. Allons-y. Direct. Et là. Ouais.
For Africans who were around during the 90s and early 2000s, you couldn't leave an event without hearing this track at least once. This is the story of how a small group of friends in Ivory Coast created one of the most recognizable pieces of art in African history that would stand the test of time, and how that song would reach international airways and dominate nightclubs and radio streams in the 2000s. Follow me on the journey of the greatest song in African history. To better understand Premier Gaou and the effect it had on Africa during its time period, we need to take a step back and understand the socio-economic situation that these artists were living in during the 1990s. In the 1990s, Ivory Coast, particularly Abidjan, faced significant socio-economic challenges, largely due to a combination of political instability and economic policies that did not yield the expected outcomes. Abidjan, once a symbol of prosperity and dubbed the Paris of West Africa, experienced a dramatic shift towards becoming emblematic of a failing state. This downturn was marked by deteriorating infrastructure, increased unemployment, and a rise in corruption. The economic difficulties can be traced back to several key factors. Initially, Ivory Coast's economy was booming, driven by its agricultural sector, with coffee, cocoa, and timber as its primary exports. However, a severe drought in the mid-1980s, coupled with a global drought in commodity prices, thrust the country into economic turmoil. Despite efforts to diversify the economy and reduce dependency on agriculture, a significant portion of the population remained reliant on this sector for income. The downturn was exacerbated by political instability, starting from a Coup'Detat in the late 1990s, followed by an army mutiny, a civil war leading to the country's diversion, ethnic violence, and repeated postponement of elections. These events created a climate of uncertainty further deteriorating the economic situation and diminishing investor confidence. One critical economic policy that had adverse effects was the 50% devaluation of the CFA franc in 1994. Although this was intended to stimulate economic growth by improving the competitiveness of exports, it led to a spike in inflation and increased the cost of living for the population, undermining economic stability. The economic rebound in the late 1990s, attributed to improved prices for cocoa and coffee and some liberalization measures, was not enough to fully recover from the earlier setbacks. Abidjan's development was significantly influenced by the construction of the Vridi Canal in 1951, which transformed it into a major seaport and led to rapid population growth. Despite these developments, the economic and social infrastructure could not keep pace with the city's expansion, leading to environmental degradation and pressure on the city's economy. Migration from rural areas in neighboring countries added to these challenges. Although initiatives like the Urban Master Plan and political decentralization aimed to alleviate some pressure by developing other cities and moving the capital to Yamoussoukro. The socio-economic struggles of Abidjan in the 1990s highlight the complex interplay between political instability, economic policies, and environmental challenges, which collectively impacted the city's development and the well-being of its residents. That was the environment that members of Magic System grew up in, and as we break down the formation of the group and backstory of the lyrics behind their hit song, it gives a striking example of it. The formation of the iconic group starts at very humble beginnings. The four-man group of Asalfo, Gude, Tino, and Manadja from Anoumabo, a poor neighborhood in Ivory Coast's largest city, first bonded over their love of football and music. At a young age, they were heavily inspired by Alpha Blondy, an Ivorian reggae singer and international recording artist. Many of his songs are politically and socially motivated and are mainly sung in his native language, Dioula, French and English, though he occasionally uses other languages, for example Arabic or Hebrew. He achieved international acclaim with his 1984 album Coup'Detat. The four young men were major fans of the artist, even keeping photos of Alpha Blondy inside their notebooks. But instead of diving into reggae music like their idol, the young musicians would end up getting swept into the budding Zouglou movement. The Zouglou music movement, originating from Ivory Coast, encapsulates a unique blend of social commentary, cultural expression, and musical innovation, deeply entwined with the socio-political landscape of the country. Emerging in the early 1990s among university students in Abidjan, particularly from the Yopougon student accommodation at the University of Cocody, Zouglou was initially a dance and a form of expression for students grappling with economic challenges, including budget cuts in education. The genre quickly evolved into a musical style that addressed broader social issues, using a mix of local languages and French street slang, making it resonate with the Ivorian youth and beyond. Zouglou's origins can be traced back to traditional Ivorian rhythms and the ambiance, facile or woyo music, popular in Abidjan's multi-ethnic neighborhoods. This foundation allowed Zouglou to become a multi-ethnic and nationally representative style. The name Zouglou itself, interestingly, is a made-up term, initially an inside joke among its creators, which was later misinterpreted in a newspaper article as referring to a Baoulé expression meaning they're piled up like rubbish, in reference to the poor housing conditions of student dormitories. Before becoming a Zouglou group, many young musicians started out performing woyo, a local street sound that consisted of call-and-response songs about everyday life, aided with simple percussion. The four young men were part of a large group of around 30 or more people, who would perform woyo at athletic events throughout the neighborhood. They eventually broke into Zouglou by trimming the group down to 8 and further split the group into 2 groups of 4, with Asalfo, Manaja, Gude, and Tino grouping together, forming the iconic quartet. The name Magic System wasn't originally planned. The group found themselves at a showcase to perform when the organizers denied them entry without a group name. They were all wearing branded Maggie t-shirts, but knew they couldn't name themselves after a popular seasoning. So on the fly, they adapted it to Magic and added System to signify a grouping. In 1997, they released their first album, Papi 2, but it was a commercial flop. During a talent show in 1999, they ran into a famous local producer named David Tayoralt, a member of famous pop group Woya, and convinced him to give him an appointment at his studio in the neighborhood of Cocody. Asalfo had a tune in his head at the moment and needed a recording session to get it out. Only issue was, the only available recording session was that same day, and the team was broke, unable to afford a taxi fare to get to the studio. Luckily, a woman in their neighborhood felt bad for the musicians and lent them money to get to the session. Asalfo never wrote down the music or lyrics, as the words were simply a retelling of his own life. The song Premier Gaou details a finicky lover who rejects Asalfo when he was broke, only to give him attention when he's financially stable. Asalfo decides to play games with her, inviting her over for dinner and making ridiculous propositions like eating grilled alligator and elephant stew before chicken won't be enough to fill her up. The tune is punctuated by the regular refrain Nangele Nangele Wa, a common response in Woyo songs, which means you're crazy, while the chorus translates an age-old adage into Ivorian slang, On dit Premier Gaou n'est pas Gaou, or c'est deuxième Gaou qui est nyata, or essentially, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. By the time the artist made it to the studio, Tayoralt was gone for the day and the studio was already closed. They had no money to go home and didn't want to risk their safety walking in the dark, so they decided to sleep outside the studio and walk home in the morning. In a fortunate twist of fate, Tayoralt reappeared at the studio hours later after forgetting something he needed to retrieve. There he found the 4 artists sleeping outside his door. Moved by their determination, he opened the studio, and in the early hours of the morning, Premier Gaou was recorded. The song gained popularity around the city as the group performed at local shows around the country. It became a popular song selection among fans, consistently requested at concerts. The group collected enough money to record a music video, which allowed them to get placed on nationally broadcasted music shows. The low-budget video features Asalfo acting out the storyline, interspersed with scenes of the group dancing throughout the city. It was filmed for 450 euros. The car was borrowed from someone's brother, the house was borrowed, and the costume at the end. The clothes they wore were their own clothes. Once the video hit the streets, the song's popularity skyrocketed. On Christmas Eve in 1999, an army commander named Robert Gueux staged a coup and deposed then-President Henry Konan Bedie. After a brief smattering of violence, things began to calm down, but the coup served as a precursor for the political instability that would follow in the coming decade. It put the continent's attention to the Ivory Coast, which unintentionally also benefited the popularity of the song, which was a shining beacon during difficult times. Magic System were due to perform in Burkina Faso and travel by plane. Due to the coup, they drove instead and took a plane back. After that performance in Burkina Faso, the song rang throughout different parts of Africa. Next, it was time for the song to go international. The Magic System success story continued and soon began an international conquest, starting in France. The hit racked up 90,000 sales after it was first broadcasted on Claudie Siar's show on Radio France International in December 1999. In October 2000, Premier Gaou managed to get itself on the airwaves of popular French youth station Skyrock, but it failed to get picked up despite its large group of Ivorian fans living in France at the time nicknamed Gaou Files. It wasn't until 2002 that things began moving favorably for the hit single. In February 2002, French DJ Bob Sinclair released Les Bisous, an infectious dance remix of the group's original song, commissioned by Next Music, the group's Parisian label. It was incredibly received and became a popular staple in clubs all across the country, at one point ranking in the top 5 of the most played club tracks for several consecutive weeks. In June 2002, Premier Gaou re-emerged on the airwaves of Contact FM, a small radio station in Lille, where it was included in the regular programming schedule. And it just so happened that it was on the club scene that Pierre Lebrun, musical programmer on Fun Radio, picked up the African song and believed it was an instant hit. Thanks to their continued success, the original version of the song finally crossed into mainstream radio. Within weeks, the single was being played up to 117 times a week on ADO-FM, a real first for an African single in France. By the end of August, Fun Radio had gotten in touch with Magic System's label, Next Music, and offered to launch a joint marketing campaign on behalf of the single. And thus, it was that the original version of Premier Gaou ended up being broadcast on Fun Airways 10 times a day. After several weeks, Premier Gaou soon ranked at number 6 in the top 40 of the most broadcasted singles in France at the time, beating out American rapper Eminem and French superstar Jean-Jacques Goldman. Between the 1st and 7th of November, Premier Gaou managed to rocket up to number 2 in the broadcast top 40. Meanwhile, over the past 6 weeks, the new video clip for Premier Gaou was hovering between number 3 and number 5 in the video top 60, beating out Latin superstar Jennifer Lopez. Yes, this song that was made by a group of poor Africans who slept on the floor outside the studio because they couldn't afford a taxi home, who could barely afford to make a music video, was beating out Eminem and Jennifer Lopez in France during the early 2000s. The single topped at number 4 on the French charts and sold roughly 300,000 copies and remained in the top 100 for 28 weeks, 10 of them in the top 10. Bob Sinclair's remix topped at 100,000 copies sold, earning the group double gold disc status for album and single sales. It was the first time in music history that a record distributed on an independent French label had ever achieved such mega hit status.
Ils ont tous vibré sur Premier Gaou, l'Afrique, mais pas seulement. En France, le groupe ivoirien Magic System rafle un double disque d'or, envahit les radios et les discothèques. On parle désormais du phénomène Magic System.
Magic System. Et j'aimerais dédier ce disque à toute la communauté africaine qui a soutenu Magic System et à tous les Européens qui ont accepté Magic System.
Ouais, un groupe africain en France, la première fois que je vois ça.
Tout le CD, franchement, je le trouve bien. Donc, je sais pas, c'est l'ambiance, c'est chaleureux. Enfin voilà,
Ils sont super, c'est de la musique africaine, c'est rythmé, c'est très sympa.
Like any music group, they eventually moved on to other projects, but for me and millions of Africans, this is the one they remember the most. It holds a special place in everyone's heart who was around the 90s and early 2000s. Whether it plays its role as comfort during difficult times or a celebratory song at weddings, birthday parties, and events, it always gets the crowd moving. Magic System is still active. They are still making music and performing at live events. They recently performed during the 2024 African Cup of Nations and have a successful YouTube channel with over 1 million subscribers. This video essay was a moment to speak on the incredible journey to their amazing hit and hopefully inspire others out there that no matter what it is you're aiming for in life, to remember that you may be one move away from success. Goodbye.